Welcome to another episode of Distory with Kate and Kirk, and this evening we are continuing down our wild ride with Mr. Toad, and we are going to be heading all the way through outside of Winky's pub into London and then into the courtroom, and we're probably going to stop just before the hot place. With me, as always, to celebrate and look and investigate at all the details of this amazing attraction, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in Disneyland, is Kate, the Disney Cicerone. Kate, how are we doing today?
Doing really good. Yeah, very excited for this episode. I have some interesting stories that aren't necessarily just related to Toad, but are Toad adjacent, I guess, in some ways. So very excited to dig into those. Some things that are just kind of related to Disney history in general that I can't wait to share with everybody. So very excited for this
That's
one.
a new one. Toad adjacent.
Toad adjacent, yes.
I like it.
So where we left off last time was we were in Winky's pub. We spent a lot of time there this last episode. So we're just about ready to bust through the bay window of the pub out into London Square, which is where we'll spend the bulk of our time probably for this episode, because there's so many details in this scene. And I think there's a lot of things that people miss in this scene because it goes by so quickly. So very excited for that.
That's like the theme of this whole entire attraction is You miss everything because we're moving fast. I think most people, if you ask them, they know that they go through a countryside. They know they smash through a bunch of stuff. They get hit by a train and then they go to heck. Like, that's pretty much all they got.
Yeah. They're vague
Which is pretty
awareness
good. I mean, that's still a
Toad
lot.
Hall, countryside, maybe the exploding warehouse, like that maybe thrown in there.
Maybe.
But
Maybe.
yeah,
I think they think of the train more than anything.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really memorable.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the hot place at the end. Yep.
Sure.
But Kirk, do you want to take us through here with a video? Do you want to pop us through the next scene?
I would love to. Let's do it. All right. We're leaving Winky Pub. We smash through a side wall with windows, and it leads us all the way into downtown London with lots of buildings in this open air courtyard. So the first thing that we see is this building that's got the two lights affixed to it. It does have a title on the top, which is a constabulary. A constabulary is a organization and location where a police force is housed. So in this case, it would be that Metropolitan Police constables that organized in London around this time period. So that would be their little office. And we do see in the upper window, you can see one of the bobbies with that iconic helmet that you could stand on and look over things if you needed to, right up in the upper window.
Well, I actually have a little bit more about that in particular.
I like it.
So here's the constabulary, like Kirk is talking about. A constabulary is a law enforcement body or organization typically responsible for policing a specific area. The term is commonly used in various countries to describe police forces. So it's essentially just a police station. In the upper window, what we actually see is a shadow of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. So this is another nod to the voice of the narrator for the Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad film, specifically the Mr. Toad part, obviously, which was narrated by Basil Rathbone, which we talked about way back in the very beginning of this series. But he also did, here's a close-up of his silhouette, so you can actually see his hat and then the pipe that he's holding for Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, I didn't see, because I was watching it through the video. I did not notice. And Dave Land, no pictures of this area. I was shocked.
I know.
Okay, all right, I'm down. I get it.
There's shockingly little information about this attraction out there.
Yeah.
There's way more about the Walt Disney World version than there ever has been about this Disneyland version. So that's why we're going through all these tiny little details. You can also see the window to the right has some books in the window as well. But specifically, the adventure of Sherlock Holmes is something that I want to bring up here. Why is he in here? Well, the narrator, Basil Rathbone, was in the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes in 1939. Which is why in the movie they made Ratty have a hat and a pipe like Sherlock Holmes because of that narrator, which we mentioned before, but I just thought I'd bring it up since we're looking at this silhouette here. So
Love that.
Why Sherlock
That's
Holmes
so
is in the window. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Yep.
I had crappy photos. I want to recount. No, that's awesome. I love when it's such a great call out to Ratty too. Great connection. I love that.
Yeah.
Lady Justice, also known as Justitia, was widely recognized as a symbol of law and fairness, hence why she has the blindfold, and she also is holding a sword. And it traces back to ancient mythology, particularly the balance and impartiality of legal systems worldwide. Now, prior to like more ancient Greece is where this really comes from. There was in Egypt a concept of Mat, which was an Egyptian goddess of truth, balance, and morality. And she was depicted holding a feather and symbolizing truth. And her principles were guided through Egyptian law. And then in ancient Greece, you have Themis, the Greek Titaness, who represented divine law and order. And she was often depicted holding scales, which, again, in her left hand, she's holding scales. So this is kind of like the representation of how we get to where we're finally at. And her daughter was named Dike, Dyke. Her daughter symbolized human justice and was portrayed as a young woman carrying a sword. So you're seeing all of these things getting combined together. And then the ancient Romans were the ones that finally personified Justitia, which created the Lady Justice symbol and statue that we know today, with both the blindfold, the scales, and the sword.
Yep.
Stop there. It's your turn. It's your turn now.
It's my turn. Thank you. What Kirk said, the Emperor Vespasian minted coins with the image of her seated on a throne called Lustitia Augusta, and many emperors after him then used the image of the goddess to proclaim themselves protectors of justice. Definitely not projectors of justice. So I just wanted to go over a couple of things, like what she's representing with her iconic look here. She has
fit check. Let's do it. Get ready with me, Lady Justice style.
So she has a toga, which is a Greco-Roman garment. I think most of us are familiar with the toga at this point, but it symbolizes the status of the philosophical idea of justice. She has a sword in her right hand, which we saw a little bit way back when, at the beginning of this attraction, we saw there was a sword in the grandfather clock for the pendulum. So that's what this is representing here. That was a foreshadowing of this. The sword represents the authority in ancient times, conveys the idea that justice can be swift and final. And then there's also a sword above the judge's head in The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad in the film. Then, like Kirk said, there is that balance scale in her left hand, which represents the balancing of relative substance and value, like the weight of the available evidence and arguments on both sides of any dispute. The scales can...
I like that the scales mostly are even in parallel. Sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
But in most representations, like the iconography of that is being balanced of good and fair, versus if it was lopsided, then obviously you would have some implicit bias, which is kind of interesting in our judicial system, but I will leave it there.
Yeah, for sure. Because they're balanced, the scales can then either tip in favor of either side, and then justice can be enacted upon. So that's the idea. That's why they're balanced that way. So they have not made their judgment one way or another. So sometimes this Lady Justice is blindfolded, but not in every single version. She's actually peeking in this version, which I think is really interesting. You can see she's actually like looking out from underneath her blindfold, which I think is maybe because Toad is like causing so much chaos. Do you have any thoughts about why she's peeking, Kirk?
She's a cheat, dude. She shouldn't be looking at all. I think it's because it's so audacious at what he's doing that she has to see. She can't not watch the evidence that's being portrayed in front of her of his antics and mania. I think that's the only reason, because it's so loud, it's so abrasive, and he is tearing through that courtyard.
Yeah.
And that street.
That's where I lean towards too. It's just like he's being so crazy that she can't not look at him. She's going to be peeking at him even under her blindfold. Yeah.
Plus, she's got a little thing for toads, if you know what I mean.
What?
I don't know, dude. She got to see it, man.
You know something about Lady Justice that I do not.
I know it all, dude. I'm not spilling that tea, though.
Oh, my goodness. So since the 16th century, This Lady Justice was often being depicted wearing a blindfold. This was a satirical edition intended to show justice as blind to the injustice carried on before her. But it has been reinterpreted over time and now represents impartiality. Justice should be applied without regard to wealth, power, or status. So justice is blind regardless of who you are. The earliest Roman coins also had her eyes uncovered. But in the Old Bailey Courthouse in London, Lady Justice doesn't have a blindfold. So as I wanted to look up specifically one that was in London because we're in London in this scene.
Yeah, and she's golden in the real Old Bailey one versus here she's in stone.
Yeah, and they said it's because her maidenly form is supposed to guarantee her impartiality, which renders the blindfold redundant. So I guess because she's a woman, that's why she's already trustworthy.
There's so many things I want to say, but I feel like all of them will get me in trouble. I'll lean with, I've known a lot of women.
You can't say anything.
Probably need to put the blindfold on.
Excuse me? No, I think it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. I think everybody's equally.
Everybody's got their own bias. So that's why I think the blindfold's important, because I think you need to look at the body of evidence and not necessarily prejudge somebody based on, your own implicit bias.
Yeah, I don't think it has to do with any sort of gender. I think it's just,
No. It doesn't have
it's more of your
gender.
character. I do have some examples of Lady Justice around the world, just to kind of see how this plays out in different forms. So this one's actually in Rome, Italy. This is the Palace of Justice. And then this one is the Themis outside the Supreme Court of Queensland in Brisbane, in Queensland, Australia. This one's in Bern, Switzerland from 1543. She does have a blindfold in that one. This one here is actually the one that is in London, outside the Central Criminal Court in Old Bailey, London.
The blindfold or lack thereof is a very interesting choice, but I guess that makes sense in the way that you represented it.
Yeah, and I'm getting some people chiming in here in the chat. Paul is saying the Lady Justice at the Virginia City, Nevada courthouse has no blindfold. So yeah, she is portrayed in different ways depending on where you're at and what the artist decided to emphasize about Lady Justice.
Yeah, there's one in Frankfurt. There's another one in the U.S. Supreme Court has one. So they're all over. We got justices everywhere, dude. You want justice? We got it. Everybody used justice.
Yeah, it's really interesting though that all over the world. It seems mostly in Western culture. I didn't see.
Well, don't you think it's a democratic thing? Like if you think about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, those democracies coming over, I think that's all the relative history you need to understand why it would be implemented now.
Yeah,
into
for sure.
Westernized culture, at least.
One last thing about Lady Justice here is the first time you actually see her is when you see the very first cop as you're, going through that area where there's the cutout. Remember, we saw Lady Justice from afar. So I just wanted to point out the fact that the very first time you see her is associated with the first time you see a cop. So it's like you're the foreshadowing of, you're going to get in trouble and you're going to be judged for what you're doing, Mr. Toad, as you, break out of Toad Hall and almost run over people in the countryside. I think that's very important storytelling. So I mentioned before the grandfather clock that we see in the beginning. I just wanted to pull it up here so that we could see it again one last time. You can see that pendulum has what looks like a sword in it. And we discussed the potential of the foreshadowing with the clock being 2:20, so 0220 for a balanced time with the scale. Kirk also mentioned that the top of the clock looks like it has potentially a scale at the top that looks unbalanced in this regard. And then there's also a face at the top that kind of reminds me of the faces we're going to see later in the area with the judge. So this whole kind of scene with Lady Justice was foreshadowed way here in the beginning of Mr. Toad. Most people totally miss this because we fly by it really, really fast. So where do we want to go from here? We need to go back to the right.
Let's head back on in. Lady Justice and...
I like the sound effects.
Yeah, well, we had to hit the brakes, dude.
So you see here on the right, actually, before we hit the boot sign up there is a sign that it was really hard for me to catch, but there's one that says sale. And then there's another sign that's on top of it that says estate auction. And so I wonder if they're implying that they're going to sell things from Toad Hall.
Toad Hall.
Mm-hmm. I can't
That would
imagine.
make sense.
Yeah, I can't imagine there would be any other reason for that. So I'm pretty sure it's an estate auction
Well,
for a toad hall.
think about this for a hot second. What is that poster affixed to? It's affixed to the backside of Winky's pub. So the Weasels would put that right onto the pub because that's their space to do advertising for whatever they want. So estate sale would make perfect sense.
Right, exactly. So then right next to that is Smythe's Boot and Shoes. It says sales and mending, and then it has 1875 as the date, which is significant later, and we'll explain when we get there. But the name Smythe comes from an Old English word smitten, which means to strike or to hit. And it's a reference to the hammering done in metalworking, or in this case, putting together cobbling shoes, right?
Does it say soles and mending or does it say sales and mending? I didn't have a good photo. I just was like staring at it.
I think it says sales and mending when I zoomed in. It is hard to see, though. It's a tough one. But I do want to say that if the meaning of it is to strike or to hit, did they put the word Smythe in there because Toad is running into everything in this ride?
Yeah, that would be because there's no connection to a name that I could find that worked on this attraction. So yeah. I'm guessing it's more in line with smitten.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think is going on here. Do you have anything about Smythe's Boot and Shoes?
No, that's you landed on exactly where I was at.
Okay. I will also mention that there is a cutout here to the right that you can see. There's kind of like a half wall, and then there is that cutout section that is that place where you look through and see Lady Justice. So you're actually seeing like close to the beginning of the ride through that cutout in the wall there to the right.
Yeah, and again, on top of the Smythe boots and shoes, they have a giant shoe on the top. I think that's really important to call back to when Kate was mentioning how literacy was a giant issue during this time period. So almost every one of these buildings will have some sort of artistical iconography, not just the letters on the signage.
Right.
So we'll see that a couple of times in here.
Right. Because people couldn't read the signs, so they had to put some sort of symbolism on them.
Couldn't read good, so put photos.
Exactly.
In the foreground, in front of Lady Justice. So if we look to the left of that Smythe shoe shop, we can actually see this fountain, which is the large structure in the center, which is drawing everybody's attention.
Yeah. So I have a couple of things about this. The fish are actually squirting real water in this scene, which I don't know if I've ever noticed that it is a legit fountain with real actual water. It's not a special effect or anything. We see Cyril Proudbottom holding Toad up on his hoof, his right hoof in the air, and Toad is looking up in the heavens and balancing on one foot, which is super cute. So there is something in the window behind them, which is a silhouette of a weasel, which you can only see kind of from a certain angle. But there is so I always kind of wondered where the weasels show up because you don't really see them anywhere. And you remember in 1955, they had like the weasel in the London Tower scene balancing on a sign, but they didn't show up anywhere else. But I'm pretty sure this is the only place, unless you can think of another time, I think this is the only place the weasels show up in this attraction.
Yeah, we don't see him ever except for this.
No, just in the like preview, mural tapestry thing in the loading area.
You would think you would have seen him in Winky's pub, but we do not.
Yeah, or some sign of him besides like all we get is like the dartboard. Maybe they were playing darts, but that's just like a hint of somebody might have been there. That's all.
Yeah, we actually are getting a shadow silhouette here.
I know that this is a bit more of a decorative fountain, but if you don't mind, I would love to go to something. I want to talk about drinking fountains in London, if you don't mind taking a little rabbit trail with me.
Let me grab some water because I feel like I'm going to be parched after this.
You're going to need your water as you say it.
Just tell us the story, Kate. Enough with the antics.
Okay, so in the 1850s, medical research linked cholera epidemics to polluted water. They kind of like figured out like, hey, all these people are getting sick because the water is not good, right? And so they demonstrated the public health risks of London's water network because of all this. They decided to create a network of drinking water fountains, and the fountains then made it easier to access clean drinking water in the city, especially for the working classes who often lacked reliable and safe water at home. So the Metropolitan Free Drinking Fountains Association was established in 1859 to build and manage London's new fountains. The designs varied, but one common, if not universal, feature was the name of the person who provided the bulk of the funding for the fountain. was on it somewhere, and also some form of biblical messaging. So honoring Mr. Toad because he was wealthy, perhaps he was the one that funded the fountain in this. Even though this is not a drinking fountain, it could have been used for a drinking fountain because it's in the town square, which we know, like, if you go to anywhere like Rome or whatnot, you would see there's fountains everywhere because that's where people got their water. They would go to the square and they would get their water. And so it's not unthinkable that, it looks more decorative, but it's possible that, this is a place where people could also get clean drinking water from. It was from the square here. So in the storytelling of this, it would make sense that Mr. Toad funded a public fountain for the people of this particular area because he is a very wealthy toad.
Drink out of my fish, peeps.
That sounded
I'm rich.
so wrong.
What? That's what he was like. I got that on recording somewhere. I got to find it, though. The one thing I like about this fountain, too, and this is just like an aside, is Cyril holding him up, like putting him on a pedestal. Like even in the language in the film, he calls him governor, which is like a sign of respect or somebody who's like of like an upper echelon. So I feel like him being held up in high regards while Cyril is staring at him lovingly and physically putting him on a hoof pedestal. Even though he is very misguided and has lots of ill-made decisions, Cyril looks past all of them and still puts Mr. Toad on a pedestal.
He does. He does adore Mr. Toad. So these drinking fountains also had religious scriptures and symbols that were meant to teach morals and inspire piety. The thought was if pubs were a corrupting force, drinking fountains were a way of purifying the souls of the working class. So, yeah.
We're right across from that. Interesting.
Exactly. So this fountain is located right across not from one, but two public houses or pubs. And so to me, it really does make sense that we're in this place where we're starting to like judge Mr. Toad for his misdeeds, right? He's crashing through stuff and whatnot. So we have this balance between, good and bad, behaviors and being judged and purifying yourself. Like there's redemption for yourself. So I think it's a really interesting idea of having these two pubs that are right across the street from this purifying water fountain.
Here, pop back to my screen, and if you look right on the left-hand side of this imagery, as we go in here, you have the constables, you have Lady Justice, and you have the purifying water. And then on the right, you have the public house Green Dragon and Mr. Winky's pub. And then a shoe store. Because, they be cobbling up in here.
Cobbling.
I don't know why that would be like. But yeah, that's really cool. I never would have put that together. I didn't know that about the purifying elements of there's obviously no biblical scripture written on here anywhere that we can see on this fountain. So that's omitted, but that would have been mandatory when somebody would have been constructing one of these in England. So.
Well, if you think about it, the stuff that's all across the street, and we'll get to the rest of it as well, but everything has to do with Toad's misdeeds and or other people's misdeeds. So we've got two public houses, and we have, if we're talking about the shoe, the name being about hitting things, and Toad is running into stuff, and then we'll see a couple of the other things that he hits along the way. Yeah, I think I would say everything on the left side, including the entrance to the law courts, is all. Yeah.
Is the good
and the justice,
or the law.
And the right side is all everything being hit and not going well.
Reminds me a lot of you and I. I'd be on the right and Kate would be on the left.
Yeah, that's accurate. Yes.
That's very accurate. Yin and yang, kids.
Yin and yang. All right. Do we want to go back to the right side and see? Do you want to take us over there with the? Yeah,
let's head on over to the Green Dragon.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. And stop.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Green Dragon first?
Sure.
Okay.
So, public houses, these were places that people would gather. Not only would they drink, but they would also eat. Dragons are rooted in British mythology, symbolizing strength, power, mystery. You got to remember, England with their knights and slaying dragons. Also, you have the Welsh, which had their dragon on the Welsh flag, associating with the legends of King Arthur and the Round Table. And then the symbolism of green is interesting because taverns selected it for fertility and nature and rebirth. and heraldry, especially prosperity and loyalty. It's also why people think about money and green being together. Signpost over here, again, we're seeing a dragon on a shield crest that says the Green Dragon, and the dragon has a massive dimpled mug.
I wondered if we were going to bring that up.
Nice mug, bro. But yes, for context and visual continuity, it makes perfect sense in why that Green Dragon would be sipping out of that sucker. But also, these places, there are lots of pubs that were called the Green Dragon in England and Wales, dating all the way back to the 16th and 17th century. And they usually harped on that powerful medieval imagery. Some of these places were also where Jacobite supporters of the exiled Stuart monarchy would talk about resistance to the old order. And interestingly enough, if you think about that in America, there was a Green Dragon Tavern in the 1770s that was linked to the American Revolution and against the Brits, and that was located in Boston.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I also found a Green Dragon in Tolkien's The Hobbit, or in the Lord of the Rings. It was in Hobbiton. The pub was named the Green Dragon.
Oh, interesting.
They come in pints.
I did want to mention for the Green Dragon, I did have something that I looked up about public houses because for the longest time, I thought that this was the Green Dragon Inn. I don't know why I thought that, but that in my brain, that was a story I was telling myself. But no, it's a public house. It's another pub, just like Winky's Pub, next door. But public house came from, basically it was like a tavern that was open to all, but did not include accommodation, unlike an inn. So an inn would potentially have, something where they could serve them food or drink, but a tavern didn't have anything like that. So they were labeled as public houses. That's why they had to change their name for them. Instead of an inn, they labeled them as public houses because to say you can't stay here, essentially, you can come here and drink, but you got to go home. So the name was shortened to pub from public houses and eventually became the generic name for all inns, taverns, and ale houses. But yeah, and it's public spelled Publick. So it's kind of like an old English spelling of public house, which I think is interesting. The significance of the Green Dragon here is this is also foreshadowing, of course, of the Green Dragon that we're going to see in the hot place at the end of this attraction. So, and I'll have more to say about that when we actually get to that Green Dragon. I don't want to go too far into dragon history here. I think.
Well, it sounds like you're dragging this segment on. Let's move it.
Okay, fair enough. Do we want to talk about the baker next to it?
Yes, we need to talk about the baker.
Okay. So we have the baker here is from Denton's Delicious Pies, as the vehicle, his delivery vehicle next to him states. And he is balancing these pies, but he's dropping them as Toad goes by and I guess shoves him out of the way. I don't have too much about this except that he does say, "You frog-faced little twit," is what he says as you go by him. That is what the audio says, in case you didn't catch it.
It's also what Kate says to me before we start the show, just to amp me up. It's how we motivate ourselves before we start the show.
You frog-faced little twit.
I go, all right, I got it. I'll be better, Miss Kate.
I also think this might be a throwback to the butler with his tray that used to be in the 1955 version, because you think of like something balancing and like food almost falling down. They got rid of the butler in Toad Hall, but maybe they added this guy as kind of a balance of somebody holding a tray and things falling off of it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to talk about with the baker
Oh my God,
here?
please let me. Let's talk pot. You know me, snacks, Diz snack expert. You know we're talking food. So I had to think about, well, what kind of pies would this possibly be? Because like when I think as an American who's living in the 21st century, I think immediately fruit pies and sweet pies, but that's not the norm. When people say pies, and this is consistent now today, in England, they're typically talking about savory meat pies. And in this case, I think this is a meat-based pie. It could be lots of different things. It could be minced beef, it could be mutton, it could be suet, it could be dried fruits, all of which were very, very popular during this time period. The number one ad would be the mincemeat pie, which shown here, which has fruit in it. Now, mincemeat pies eventually end up being more sweet, then savory down the line, as nowadays people only eat mincemeat, and it's mainly just like raisins and currants and dates and stuff like that in it. It's not real meat, but it changes after the 1800s to that sweeter style. The other style, this is where we get weird. Let's get weird up in here. The other style is steak and kidney pie, which I had heard about when I was a kid, but I never actually Googled it, looked at it, or anything.
Yeah.
It's a hearty pie filled with diced beef, ox kidney,
Oh.
onions, and a thick gravy. And I was trying to like figure out like, well, how would you know? Like on the crust tops, does that tell you or denote what the flavors are inside? And usually it would. Like this leaf texture of this specific, each place would have their own way, so that the bakers, after they were baked, they know which pie was filled with what toppings. So in this case, the steak and kidney had that leaf pattern on top. But I don't think these pies are steak and kidney pies. But
No?
I'm going to get to that in a second. Because I have to show the weirdest pie I have ever seen in my entire life.
Oh.
And if you go to Diagon Alley in Universal, they actually have these. You can't buy them to eat, but they have a whole entire stand. And I thought it was like a weird Harry Potter Wizarding World, like creepy thing. It was jellied eel or stewed eel was baked in a pie with rich gravy. And this was like a very popular London's East End specific dish because they would find the eel abundant in the Thames. So the Thames was filled with eels and they would jelly them, and look how nasty that is, dude. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's got like heads coming out of it.
It's got heads coming out of it. It's disgusting.
That is disgusting.
Okay, but it is disgusting. But here's what I think this is, because out of all of those pies, mincemeat, steak and kidney, game pies, which would be like filled with venison, pheasant, rabbit, or these eel pies, I actually think it's a completely different one. I think it is mutton pie. Mutton pie being made of sheep, onions, suet, which is like fat, and gravy. And this was a very, very popular, affordable food for the working class. And the reason why I think it's mutton is because earlier, you don't see any of these other animals. We don't see cows. We do see horses, but we see going towards London, we see an entire carriage filled with sheep. So I think the mutton are going into the world famous Denton's pies.
Those poor sheep.
Don't feel bad about it.
That's interesting though.
Yeah.
I think that's a logical deduction to make.
Yeah,
that it could be sheep.
I don't know, because you'd have to cut these suckers open. But in all honesty, I mean, what else would they be made of?
Yeah,
It's just like the sheep are going there. What are they? It's not like they're taking the sheep for a party. There's nothing else. Like if you look at where they are, they're on top of the bridge and they're heading directly. Like the next scene is we're heading into like Winky's. So they're like almost to Denton's shop, you know?
But I want to think that they're going to a party instead. That makes me sad.
Yeah, there is. It's a party with a guy with a hammer and a giant knife. It's awesome. It's a lot of fun.
Oh no!
It's great time.
Oh, I hate that.
By the way, mutton is weird. My dad used to really like lamb, so we would have lamb like every Christmas. That was like his thing, and once a year we would always get lamb. And lamb was always like really delicate, but it had almost like a gamey flavor. Mutton is extremely gamey, and it's very, very tough. So like a lot of times you'd have to like stew that meat to soften it up and tenderize it, but it had a very distinct musk like odor to it. Where lamb it was like 10% of the flavor of mutton. But I've had mutton once, and it was, let's just say, I'd rather grow the chops on my face than put them chops in my face.
Well, this is depressing.
What's depressing about it? It's the circle of life, Kate. We need to eat mutton.
Circle of life.
So yeah, there you go.
That's fair.
I guess the only other thing that I can share, which is like kind of like just fun timing wise, because I was curious about this, is I know it's not this, but Sweeney Todd is written in the mid 1800s. It's not turned into a musical until like the 1920s. It's like 1927. But the Demon Barber of Fleet Street comes out in these like little stories, like little serial novellas that happen in the 1940s or 1840s. So where meat was like a delicacy in this situation where it was really expensive. So the Demon Barber had amazing mincemeat pies that were made out of people. Soylent Green is people.
Okay. Yeah, that's worse than sheep, I will say.
Yeah, wouldn't you rather eat a sheep than eat I don't,
Yeah.
what's a guy name that starts with like a
People?
Steve? Would you rather eat a sheep or a Steve?
Yeah, sheep, but still gross. Yeah, no, thanks. Every time I think about the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, I would think of like Sweeney Todd. I think of the Haunted Mansion and that portrait in the gallery from the Sinister 11, which he should have a severed foot in his pocket, according to Mark Davis's original concept art, and he doesn't. And it makes me mad every time. So
no foot, we're out.
No foot.
He probably got kicked out. Let's take us to the guys working on the scaffolding. So we're going past the public house and stop. So one thing we didn't talk about is Denton's pies. It's not actually, for those that are not watching, which you can on Spotify, they do have video, or on YouTube, Disney Cicerone. The back of his delivery van is wide open with pies adorned on shelving, and he is holding up a whole entire cascading tray filled with his pies. But we kind of, I don't think we really talked about the fact that it was a delivery truck that he was coming out of. So.
I mentioned that it has a delivery truck, but I didn't mention.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Yeah. But just past the Denton Pies delivery truck, we see some workers up on some scaffolding. And our car, when this effect is working, our car is supposed to hit all of these, the different wood for the scaffolding and make them fold back. So it's implying that then the workers then would fall down from this. And it's interesting because everywhere I've seen describing this scene always says that they're painting this house. But they're not painting.
No, they aren't. No way. Do they not have eyeballs in their heads?
I think nobody pays attention to it that much, I guess. So do you want to tell them what they're actually doing up there, Kirk?
Oh, my God. I have to. Listen, as your resident Thatcher, let me, I mean, we did this before and I don't want to go too far into it, but yeah, we're talking about their Thatchers. They're people who thatch roofs. So it's a very highly specialized task. These guys are on scaffolding. They look pretty upset because Mr. Toad is bashing into their scaffolding and they're going to fall multiple stories. But I did find some more information about thatching because yearly you have to thatch roofs, particularly because
wait, I thought you were going to say yearly I have to do more research about thatching roofs.
No. Thatch roofs are actually pretty great. They last 20 to 30 years, but every year you would need annual maintenance. So this thatch roof had already been implemented, and you'll notice like he has bundles of the straw to replace it, particularly the gentleman on the left. But this annual maintenance was essential to preventing rot, fire risk, and damage. Key things they would look for: checking for birds and pests, clearing moss and algae growth, which that moisture trapped could create rotting. So the thatchers always would scrape away. Oh my God. The thatchers would scrape away moss and lichen, and sometimes they would even use a process called lime washing to deter growth. They would also beat the thatch, which they called dressing the roof, and they would comb and beat down any of the loose straw to prevent buildup. This also would keep it compact, keeping the roof itself wind and rain repellent. And then any areas that were wearing thin, they were patched with fresh straw, reed, or heather, depending on. And heather's mainly in the northern parts of England towards Scotland. More heather gets used there. They actually drink heather tips in tea, the Scots do. So, but it's like, think of it like a different style of almost like a wheat or a straw. And then fire prevention, they would look at any areas that needed protective coatings with mud or clay, particularly areas that would be around chimneys.
I didn't even bother looking up thatching because I knew that you would do it. So I do have a side note, though, that just a little side story. Elliot and I used to live in Ireland back when we were first married because he went and did his master's degree program in Limerick because he plays Irish music. We lived in Ireland and we would just take these little like day trips sometimes because Ireland's not very big. So we would use the bus system and go take day trips places. Well, we went to Adair, Ireland, which if you're familiar with Ireland at all, Adair is one of those places where they have a whole bunch of thatched roofs. So it's very picturesque, and you can go see all the original kind of thatching and whatnot. But we found out pretty quickly that the bus only goes through there like once or twice a day, and there's not a whole lot to do in Adair, Ireland. So we pretty much got stranded in Adair, Ireland for an entire day of our lives that we will never get back because the bus wasn't coming back and there was nothing left to do. So we stared at a lot of thatched roofs for an entire day in Ireland.
Crazy.
So.
Did you and Elliot meet on Thatch.com?
No, we did not.
That's a shame. It's a shame.
Something I do want to point out about these guys is that if you see them up close here, this is when somebody took a picture of them when the ride was down. So you can see the work lights are up here. So they are painted flats up there. And
Kate, they are full-on Monets. You know, from far away, they look great, but up close, they're a big old mess.
This is so true. They're scary looking. But remember how I talked about in the previous episode, if you were with us, they have all these layers of audio and they're overlaid one on top of the other so that it's supposed to be chaotic. It's not just like this person says a line and then you hear this person says a line. It's all kind of happening at the same time because they want you to feel the chaos that Toad is causing as he goes through this ride. So these guys actually do say some things that I don't know if anybody's ever like really noticed, but he says, wait till I get me hands on you. He says, what the big idea then? Scaring crows, watch out, mate. Get off the ruddy scaffolding and move that bloomin' thing.
Wow, that's a lot of phrases because you wouldn't get all those as you're going through. You'd only get this is like the cosmic rewinds of Disneyland. You need to go on there and see what the Thatchers say to you.
Yeah.
Catch all the quotes.
All the quotes. There's what, 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things that they say. So, yep, this is our version of cosmic rewind.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God, dude, he said he wanted to put his hands on me. That's the best one.
Wow, I don't know how to come back from that. So before we go forward, we do want to take just a little bit of a pause and talk about some of the things that we have going on at Walrus Carp and Disney Cicerone. Kirk, what do you got going over there at Walrus Carp?
I got shirts, dude. I got shirts for days. Because it's Mardi Gras, I just got my freshly printed Marty. It's Life of the Marty. It's got Baron Tauntaun on it. It's got a king cake and, of course, a little tiny baby in the king cake. On the purple, looking good. It's like kind of flamish. And then I have, if you like to go back to the future, that is, I've got our Great Scott DeLorean shirt. And it says, instead of saying DeLorean, it says Carp on it.
Oh, that's fun.
So yeah, you can get it at walruscarp.com. What do you got going on, Kate?
I love our scripted. This is what we say every time.
Kate, what do you got cooking?
I'm busy doing a lot of editing over here at Disney Cicerone. That's most of my life right now. Even though I am starting writing my next book as well, but I'm currently working on getting a sequel out to A Glimpse of the Magic, Finding Ourselves in the Disney Story, which is a collection of writings about how we love the Disney parks, how we experience them, integrated with Disney history. So I'm currently working on a sequel to this, which is going to be called A Glimmer of Pixie Dust, Finding Our Hope in the Disney Story. So that you guys are the first ones to hear the official title. So that will be a new book that's coming out this spring. So you can get all of my books I've written for now. This will be the 5th one, and they're available at Amazon. You can also get them on Audible if you would prefer me to read you a book. So just look for Disney Cicerone or Kate Grasso, and that's where you can read all of these Disney history books.
Yeah, they're great.
Thanks.
If you look at my reviews on Amazon, which I have reviewed the books on Amazon, literally just says they're great.
Now, you actually leave really great reviews. Yeah.
Yeah, I write thorough ones so people, it's not ChatGPT up in here.
All right. Do you want to take us into the next section here, Kirk?
I would love nothing more than to take us into the next section. So we're leaving our little Thatchers, and we notice up on the right-hand side that there is a giant brick chimney with a chimney sweep at the top. And I know, Kate, you did a little bit of a deep dive on chimney sweep, so I'd love to hear more.
I did. So if you notice, I think that there is also at the bottom of that chimney, I'm just noticing now, there's another sale and estate auction sign on the bottom of that chimney like there was earlier. So it's just hard to see in this video, but I'm pretty sure that's what we're seeing there as well.
Okay.
So I think they just posted it up all over town, essentially, that there's an estate sale.
Well, if you don't put your marketing out there, how are you going to sell a thing?
That's right. It's important.
We should take that advice, Kate.
We do see a lot of these like crooked buildings that are built out like these 3D sets. But if you notice, they look like they're like leaning, which is supposed, I think, adds to the whole idea of this being this mania, this madcap adventure that Toad is having through London. Is the buildings aren't straight up and down. It's like it's almost like he's pushed over the buildings, even though he hasn't, which I think is really interesting. And
yeah, it's made to make you feel like uneasy in the setting because it's so chaotic.
Right, exactly. So up on the roof, we do see two different chimneys with two different chimney sweeps that pop out of them. They kind of pop up and then go back down. So I want to talk about chimney sweeps just for a few minutes here. They're very...
I'm stoked because you said it's horrible. I need to hear it.
I can only say so much of it because it is really horrible. But I want to talk about the chimney sweeps. Of course, they're very reminiscent of Mary Poppins. I think that's what Disney fans usually think about when they think of chimney sweeps. They immediately go Mary Poppins, right? With the Serpentine scene and Bert and all of those things. But I do want to talk about this a little bit because this is before 1875, it was common to conscript children, usually orphans, into chimney sweeps or climbing boys, as they called them, because of the small size of chimneys. So what you're looking at here is a journal or gazette from 1894 that shows how these buildings were laid out, where you would see, because they had so many flues kind of like going up in through the building, they got smaller and smaller, partially because of they had a chimney tax, essentially, that like how many chimneys you had or the size of your chimneys would, cost you more money. So they got smaller and smaller over time, where they're only like 9 by 9. Like they're really small spaces. And so what they did was they basically just got children and then trained them as apprentices to sweep chimneys. And I will say that this is a truly atrocious practice, so much so that I don't even want to get into all the details here. And you know me, I'm very detailed and love to share all the things, but there are some really horrific things that happen to these children in these chimneys. So if you want to research it, please do, but I just don't want to get too far into it because it really is awful. So I will say though, that the dates on the buildings, remember how I said they were important? Well, the one that's on this building that's underneath the chimney sweep here, it says it's 1871. So we know that this building was built in 1871, and so this must be past that date, right? The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1875 in England ended the practice of using young children as chimney sweeps by requiring all chimney sweeps to be registered with the police, essentially putting an end to child labor and protecting children from dangerous working conditions in chimneys. So we're establishing that like everything that we've seen in this scene is establishing that we are after that time frame of when children would have been used to do this. And so that's why we see in this scene, these are full-grown adults that are sweeping these chimneys and not children, which makes me feel better, quite honestly.
Yeah.
On the brighter side, if you do see a chimney sweep in England, they're considered good luck. So if you see a chimney sweep on your wedding day or have them be a guest at your wedding, you get even more luck if a chimney sweep kisses the bride or shakes the groom's hand, which I think is really fun. And the legend of...
Kissing the bride is really fun. You know how mad I'd be? I'd be like, yo, get your soot all over my lady. What are you doing?
Well, presumably he would have taken a bath before he comes to the wedding. I don't think he would be there in his slit.
Do people do... This is a very dumb question. Do people like hire chimney sweeps to show up for their weddings? Like,
yeah,
for good luck?
They would
invite
like
practice?
them. Yeah. Well, I don't know if they hire
that's what I'm
them,
saying.
But they for sure invite them. Maybe they hire them. But the reason they're lucky, it comes from this legend here. So in 1066, a chimney sweep noticed a runaway carriage heading right toward King William of Britain, who was peacefully walking down the road. Showing great courage, the chimney sweep ran toward the king to push him out of the way of the carriage, which saved his life. To show how grateful he was to this chimney sweep, King William declared all chimney sweeps as bringers of good luck and invited the life-saving chimney sweep to his daughter's wedding as a lucky charm for the bride and groom. So that's where the story comes from. But it's weird because I'm like, why was the king walking down the road with like no protection? That to me is a strange tale. Like, I didn't think kings walked anywhere on roads,
Right. Yeah,
So,
that doesn't make sense.
no. But that's the legend, and that's why chimney sweeps are considered lucky. So,
Okay.
but then, of course, I did want to talk just a little bit about Mary Poppins because I feel like I have to share this story. If we're going to talk chimney sweeps, this is one of my favorite Disney stories about Mary Poppins. So this comes from an interview with Peter Ellenshaw, who painted the backgrounds for Mary Poppins that look very, very real. He said, Bill Walsh, who co-produced Mary Poppins, came in one day and asked me if I knew any vulgar songs. Not something obscene, but something common, something low-life chimney sweeps might sing. And you can see some of the concept art from Mary Poppins for the chimney sweep section. He said, well, I'd gone on a pub crawl, and my friend and I would get everyone up in the different pubs we went to and have them sing and dance to an English song called Knees Up, Mother Brown. I showed Bill, and he immediately brought in Walt and storyman Don DeGrady, and who was one of the best storymen ever at Disney. We danced across the room and back with our arms linked and our knees up very high. It seemed very strenuous for Walt. We didn't know at the time he might be sick. So this is in the 1960s. And so Walt was ill by this point, but didn't really know how sick he was yet. Walt said to bring in the Sherman brothers, who were writing the music, and I had to do it all over again. Of course, they couldn't use the actual song. So they came up with another song that was similar. I think it's a little too elegant in the final film. It really is much more fun when it is vulgar, is what he said. So it was a little bit too watered down for his taste. But I think it's really funny that the Sherman brothers kind of went off and wrote this song, Step in Time, pretty quickly. Basically, they just stole the tune from Knees Up, Mother Brown and then turned it into Step in Time. Okay, so Knees Up, Mother Brown is a pub song believed to date back as early as the 1800s, but was first published in 1938. It originated in the public houses of East End of London and was associated with Cockney culture. At the end of the First World War, it is documented to have been sung widely in London on the 11th of November, 1918, which was Armistice Night. So the expression knees up means a noisy party, usually with dancing, particularly with drinking. And so I just bear with me. I'm not great at singing here, but I do want to sing the tune just so you kind of get the side by side, because if I play it, it's probably going to get like copyright strike. So this is knees up, Mother Brown, knees up, Mother Brown. Under the table you must go, E-I-E-I-E-I-O. If you catch you bending, I'll saw your legs right off. Knees up, don't get a breeze up, knees up, Mother Brown. Oh my, what a rotten song, what a rotten song, what a rotten song. Oh my, what a rotten song, and what a rotten singer too. So if you know Step in Time, very, very similar, right? Thank you. Well, it says like step in time, step in time, step in time, step in time, never need a reason, never need a rhyme, step in time to step in time. And then he says, kick your knees up, right? For Knees Up, Mother Brown, it says, kick your knees up, step in time, kick your knees up, step in time, never need a reason, never need a rhyme, kick your knees up, step in time. So you can see how they pretty much just straight up stole the tune from Knees Up, Mother Brown. So I do love the Sherman brothers, but they did this an awful lot. This was very, very common in their practice to just kind of take the tune and just kind of tweak it a little bit and make it their own. Very common. And then they were working on a pretty tight deadline, so I can understand why they did that. But so anyway, that's my chimney sweep story about how they came up with the Step in Time song. So just a little side story. I just thought it was fun because I like this little story.
Kate just wanted to sing for all of you.
I didn't.
If you didn't know that, she's like she definitely is a big singer. You don't realize this, but she sings a lot of karaoke, and she just wanted to show off.
It's so not true. I had to like convince myself
true.
that I had to do this.
This is
like,
her being modest and humble. She does
sing.
this all the time, and she always says these kind of things, but then she gets right on stage every week.
The ironic part is that's where I got my degree in, was singing. So I do have an actual degree in it.
Welcome to Told You So.
So are we ready to head on into the courthouse?
Please, let's go to the law court. Bum, bum, bum.
All right. Do you want to
Bum,
take
bum,
us on in?
bum, 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 bum. It says justice above this as well.
It does.
As we head into our law court. which has a Bobby on the left-hand side, a giant judge with his big old wig, and he's pointing disdainfully at us. What is he saying, Kate? I know you're like the queen of dialogue on this ride. Do you have that?
Guilty. That is all. Wait, he says, guilty. Thank you. That is all. I always thought he said, that is all. That is all. But he says, guilty. Thank you. That is all. So, yeah, I got it wrong. I listened to the actual audio for it. I was like, oh, he doesn't say that twice. All right. I want to back up just slightly because I want to show the outside. There is that justice sign that you can see at the top with an eagle just sitting right outside the door of the law court. And it also has a flag as well. But heading on in here, we do see there are faces on the top of the columns that look like kind of demon faces-ish. And they look a little bit like the judge to me, Kirk. I don't know about you, but they look a little bit like
we
him.
Obviously see him later on very demonized, so I think that's very appropriate parallel.
Yeah, but you can see them there. And, of course, that cop that is a painted flat. The sconces also look like flames. So, so there's a couple of these sconces here that look like flames. And which is more foreshadowing for what's to come, obviously. And then the judge is actually a barrister in the film, but they changed it for the ride. So you can see this is from Mr. Toad in the film, and you can see him very much doing his cross-examination there. He is the counsel to the crown in this scene. But he does say guilty, thank you, that is all. He says that is thank you, that is all is like a line he says like all over the place in this scene. So it makes sense that they included it, except they added the word guilty because he's the judge in this ride, even though he's the lawyer or the barrister in this. And also the position of his eyes where he's looking has changed, which I didn't notice until I went through here. Because in this particular scene, he's looking like down to where he's pointing. And in this one, he's looking straight at you. So it's interesting to me that like the position of his like eyeballs have shifted over the years. And I couldn't quite figure out what he is now because it's like impossible to see because it goes by so fast. So I'm going to look this next week when I'm in Disneyland. But I think we have to talk
I'm hoping he's looking at us. I would prefer that.
Yeah, me too. But I think we have to talk about wigs a little bit. I think it's time for some wig talk. If you're ready.
Let's wig out. British judges wear wigs as a part of their traditional court attire, symbolizing authority, impartiality, and continuity in the legal system. Tradition dates all the way back to the late 17th century and remains a distinctive feature of British courtrooms. When did this tradition actually start? Well, the practice of wearing wigs in the court began in the 1680s during the reign of King Charles II, which I think is hysterical because King Charles does not need a wig. That dude straight up has a mop. He looks like Cher. I don't know what is happening with that dude, but he's got a full head of hair, and I don't know why. Like curly. His is curly, but it's not white; it's black. Where all of these ones are traditionally white. But before that, judges and lawyers were known to wear long robes but no wigs, and their hair was always simply style. But in the 17th century, the wigs became fashionable because it was a status symbol amongst the English elite, and the legal profession adopted them to reflect authority and professionalism, specifically during that time period of King Charles II. And in 1705, wigs became a formal requirement for all English judges and barristers. And originally, the wigs were powdered white to give them a uniform, dignified appearance. And powdering ended in the early 1800s when wigs were instead made of white or gray horsehair, eliminating the need for powder. And they still use this tradition today in legal courts in England. And modern wigs are not powdered, but they maintain their white or gray as a nod to that tradition. So,
yeah.
Yep.
I have
wigs,
pretty much the same things that you talked about, but I have a few more details. So I talked mostly about the barristers have their own kinds of wigs, which you can see like Mr. Toad here. This is a frame from the film. He's got this like shorter wig. So they have this kind of like two versions. They have what they call a full-bottomed wig.
Full-bottomed
wig. And they have the shorter one. So for the barrister specifically, why do they wear the wigs? Well, traditionally, wigs are used to convey the formality and ceremonial aspect of the courtroom and is symbolic of the legal profession. Wearing one is a symbol of respect for the court and law, and a wig along with the robe also gives the barrister some sort of anonymity because they all kind of look alike, so to speak. I mean, obviously you can still see their faces, so it's like not that effective. But when court attire is worn, it represents that the barrister is a tool of the law rather than an individual acting on their own personal influences. So it's kind of like their own impartiality in that. I also have a few pictures here of Louis XIV of France. He was balding was what was going on. And it was considered a sign that someone had contracted syphilis if you were balding. So it was really bad in that time to lose your hair. So he disguised his scalp by wearing a wig, which then, of course, spread as a trend because, if the royalty are doing it, everybody else is going to follow suit. But like Kirk said, like the courts were pretty slow to adopt the trend. They liked wearing their natural hair, but by the 17th century, wigs were starting to be worn by the upper classes, so they adopted them in court as well. The adoption of wigs by barristers was motivated by the desire to distinguish themselves from solicitors and to establish a sense of formality and respect within the courtroom. So the difference, I was like, I'm going to look this up. I'm like, what's the difference between a barrister and a solicitor? Okay, because these are not words we use in America very much at all. We just say lawyer, right? But a barrister is a lawyer who primarily represents clients in court, and a solicitor is a lawyer who primarily provides legal advice, drafts documents, and handles client interactions outside of court. So barrister is the person in the court arguing stuff. Solicitor is usually outside of the court. That's the
It's like
difference.
more of like a paralegal versus trial lawyer.
Exactly. So by 1685, full shoulder-length wigs called full-bottomed wigs became part of proper court dress. I also wanted to mention that they did kind of, in 1820s, they'd gone out of fashion, but the coachmen, like the one here in Cinderella, bishops and those in the legal profession continued to wear them. And then the coachmen and bishops stopped wearing them about the mid-1830s. But you can see here, this is a modern photo of a barrister arguing in court, and she's wearing this kind of like half wig, right? So in 2007, wigs were no longer required during family or civil court appearances or when appearing before the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. So the decision to wear wigs typically left up to the individual barrister is at the discretion of the judge who's presiding over the case. But wigs are still worn in criminal cases, and some barristers choose to wear them during civil proceedings. Apparently, they're really, really expensive too, from what I hear from researching this. But those are specifically barrister wigs. But here's what a full-bottomed wig looks like on a judge. You can see all these like curls that go all the way down their shoulders. They're usually longer and more ornate than the traditional barrister wig. This dates back to the 17th century, and the tradition continued again up into the 1840s. Smaller wigs are now more commonly used than the full-bottom wigs. So kind of more like what we saw before with the shorter ones. And for judges, wigs have been used to convey the dignity and authority of the judiciary. So that's my wig talk here. That's what I've got. But here's a picture of all these judges in more modern times wearing their full-bottomed wigs.
All I can think of is full bottom wigs, tight with the curls, the whole court staring at Thor's. I don't know. I mean, there was another wig that I found. So like full bottom are the big ones. Then there's the barrister wigs, which are smaller, tight curled. The only other one that I did find, and I couldn't find a picture of it, was bench wigs. They're worn by judges in everyday trials, and they're shorter and more modern. So technically, there are 3 different categories.
Oh, interesting.
Of wigs.
I hadn't heard that.
Mm-hmm. I am curious to see if they will eventually, because they're no longer required in those civil and family, as you had said, but I want to see if criminal courts will still maintain them, because it's very funny watching criminal court with the wigs on, because it's like, dude, it's 2025, bro. Like,
I know. It's hard to like take them seriously.
Yes,
you know?
it's like, dude, you look like you have a Shetland pony on your head. Like, what are you doing, dude?
Yeah. I mean, but I guess if that's what they're used to in their culture, and that it like looks weird without them having the wigs because they're so used to, I don't know, it looks weird to all of us. For like,
whatever.
That's weird, dude.
Do you?
You do you. So I do want to say that behind the judge, there is actually something on the wall behind the judge. And this is the royal coat of arms, which is typically seen in royal courts. It's really hard to see in this picture, and it's almost impossible to catch a full glimpse of it, but you can just kind of see the piece of that there. So this is a version of what it looks like, just to give you a better picture of it. So most parts of the royal coat of arms have not changed since Queen Victoria came into the throne in 1837. It is used to denote the royal authority by which the government acts. It's in His Majesty's government. So by using the coat of arms, the government is showing it's acting in the king's name. So that's why you would have it in the court that's acting under the king's, jurisdiction. So the lion in here on the left is to represent England. The unicorn on the right is to represent Scotland, which is pretty much what we see. Usually in the center is a shield, and around the shield is the blue and gold garter, which is a symbol of the UK's oldest and most senior order of chivalry, the most noble order of the Garter. It says in French, evil to him who evil thinks is what it says around there, or shame on him who thinks ill of it. This is the motto of the Order of the Garter, established by Edward III in 1348. And then there's also the King's motto that's around the bottom, which we do see a piece of here in Mr. Toad, that says, Dieu et mon droit, below the shield, which translates to God and my right, which signifies the monarch's right to rule comes from God, the divine right to rule. Typically, there is that shield in the center that has a coat of arms in the middle. There's two for England that are kind of catty-cornered to each other. There's one for Ireland, which of course has the harp, and then there's Scotland on the upper right. When there is a new monarch, they do change this and update it ever so slightly, but usually it's some sort of variation of this, because I was trying to find this exact one from Mr. Toad and I was unable to find it. So either they used a version that was from that era that there's just not a picture of it that exists, or they just kind of made their own version of it. And I wish I had a full picture of it. That's something I'm going to be looking at next time I'm in Disneyland, because I need
try to take your own photo.
Yeah, because this one is not great. It's like you only see part of it. But the thing to know is that it's just that royal coat of arms is what that is on the wall, which would be the one I'm showing here on the left is the one that is in the royal court in England. So you can see it makes sense for it then to be up on the wall here with the judge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. That, I think, is where we need to probably come to a stop here before we go to prison, which is what's coming up next, and then get hit by a train and end up in the hot place, which will be...
Yeah, we're guilty. So guilty as charged, but we have to pay penance for our crimes.
Yeah. Kirk, do you have any final thoughts here as we wrap up?
I learned today that Kate bet her husband on Thatch.com.
I did not meet my husband there.
It's not even a website.
It certainly wasn't back in 2004 when we met each other. So.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think the internet existed then.
No, but no, this is really fun. I really liked your pie talk, even though it was really creepy to see those eel heads popping out of the
eels.
pie.
Ew,
So
jellied
disgusting.
eel, disgusting, dude.
Like, no,
Ew.
thank you.
Like, why do they do it like that? You would figure, like, just chop them up. But I guess, again, to denote what's in the pies, they make it very distinct.
Do you think they ate the heads or just pull them out?
I think they probably more than likely pulled them out, and it was just like an adornment to know that that was jellied eel inside.
Like what you do with parsley, and you like take it off.
Jellied eel with gravy, just like Mom used to make.
Just like Mom used to make. Anyway, well, thank you everybody for joining us for this episode of Distory. We hope you enjoyed seeing all these tiny little details as we headed on into London Square. And we also went into the law court as well. But we will see you next time as we head on into the hot place and answer the big old question, why does Toad end up in hell? So.
Whoa. Whoa. All right. Yo, it's the end of the episode. But geez, let your hair down, Kate.
We end up in the hot
let your
place.
long bottom down.
Well, you had to say it sometime. Thank you guys for being with us for this episode of Distory, and we will see you next time as we wrap up Mr. Toad in Disneyland. Bye. Bye, everybody.